One of the most common questions often asked of me is the idea of kind of how we start backswing in relation to, for example, kind of how the hands often kind of move back. So you look at, say, for example, you actually look at some of the 3D values now. What's very evident in that first move, and it's one of those things that I've really yet to not see in a very kind of accomplished and established player. So you can look at it in many ways, data. Let's look at what players do. Let's look at what players often don't do. So another approach is I've yet to ever not see a really advanced, a very accomplished player not produce this movement, despite, for example, often their beliefs, their values, their coaching background, their movement history, the environments they were born within, for example, as far as more the external environment of links golf versus, say, kind of Floridian-based golf, for example. So this is a movement often observed really in every player that I've had the fortunate pleasure of kind of spending time with today, which is very much the idea that as we start backswing, how the hands actually move away from the kind of the human. So very much, for example, from that kind of side-on view, how the hands are actually moving away from that play as they start back. So kind of using these 3D values now, what's quite evident is you can see here, and we'll really expand on this shortly, the idea of this kind of coupled movement, these partnerships in some ways, that very much is defined by that kind of hand thrust value. As we start back, so our hands are thrusting away. So in this case, the F sign, F means forward, the hands are moving forward as it started backswing. But the coupling then becomes with then the idea of kind of radial deviation. It's this partnership movement of, as we start backswing, how the hands are moving away from the human as the kind of wrists move up, which is that kind of coupled movement. So not what we're not in any way is this. Absolutely not. You need to apply some element of kind of context, some skill, some kind of emotional intellect in many ways. No one's ever said we have to start backswing doing this. Absolutely not in any way. We're looking at the very precise movements here, that as we start backswing, that couple movement of the hands actually moving away as those kind of wrists, or loosely speaking, those kind of thumbs move up. So as that hand is thrust forwards, coupled with, say, for example, the kind of wrists moving upwards. And often then we start to see them, for example, these kind of phrases, kind of clubbing hands out. Or it's very much the idea of the opposite sometimes, keep the club head in front of hands. We see kind of people doing this in some ways. What we have to look at is then, again, that kind of idea of context, is understanding why they do this. So often, for example, you'll get players that rehearse movements. Example has been in that first move, often kind of doing this, because of really many areas, they're either trying to move away from doing something, so that's their kind of way of creating a perception and awareness, almost like giving context. Well, I'm very much aware, for example, of doing that, so therefore my rehearsal is to do this. So often we look at these movements, it's very much based around what are they trying to avoid, and what are they trying to encourage, and what does it mean to them to kind of avoid doing this. So when we look at the movement, sometimes it's very clinical. It's like a text message. There's no emotional connection. There's no interaction. They're just clinical kind of digits on a screen in some ways. We need to get that kind of emotional connection into these movements. When we look at players, for example, on TV doing this, we actually never understand why they do it. Why are you doing it? So it may well be in some cases the player kind of moves this way it started back to, so therefore to them, what their awareness is, for me to avoid doing this, I have to do that. Then you look at the reality. It's that lovely concept between kind of perception and perspective. Their perception is, I need to move this way. But we look at the perspective of how they move, they often then start to move that way in backswing. So it's just their way of trying to encourage an awareness, a concept, an avoidance, for example. And also always looking at that way. I wonder why that player is doing this, which is often when we say, look at, say, videos or kind of TV commentary, we kind of lose that kind of context. So when we look at starter backswing, what's very evident in that first move as shown by those 3D values previously, how the hands move away from the human. It's called the F sign. They move forwards as they move into radial deviation. So little references we can use would be, if I take a line down from my hands here, so once again as we cut the 3D values back in, if I take a line down vertically through my hands, when I get to kind of almost kind of in this position, so being quite like loosely speaking halfway back, the hands are still on top of their start position. They haven't moved outwards, they haven't moved inwards. So why is that then defined as moving forwards? It's because the rib cage is actually then rotating away. So we're moving to, say, clockwise rotation. So if we start to move in the clockwise rotation, so apologies, the lights went out then. So we'll keep it live to keep it very real. It's early morning as I record this, so the lights have gone out, but in a very, very nice way. So as we move into backswing, we get that kind of rotation of that rib cage. So the rotation of the rib cage is creating space, or an increase in space within the hands and the rib cage. So for example, with my hands, again, using that line, the line goes straight down through the hands of the dress. If we then start to move into that kind of first phase of backswing, the hands are still on top of their start position. They've not moved outwards and away from, they've not moved in and behind. What creates the increase in space, or the perception of hands move forwards, is because that rib cage is rotating, we've now got an increase in space between the middle of the rib cage and the middle of the hand. So kind of using that as a reference. Take that start position, take a line down, or use a mirror reference for example, through the hands. As we then start to move into that first phase of backswing, the hands are still on top of their start position with those kind of thumbs moving up, which you can kind of see here now. Loose how the club shaft now sits kind of through that trail kind of bicep. It's kind of above the elbow, but kind of beneath the shoulder joint. That's those kind of physiological buffers that we discussed. That lead arm is parallel to target line, but the hands are still on top of their start position. So the idea of hands moving away relative to the thorax with the thumbs up is a movement I've really yet to ever not see produced by any advanced player, regardless, say for example, of the club they're using or their intention, for example, what they intended to do, say with the ball flight, for example. So often when we look at these movements, examples being when kind of players do this, for example, we just have to apply context. Why are they doing this? What are they trying to encourage? What are they trying to avoid? What's the history behind that movement? Rather than looking at things very clinically, oh, this player does that. Well, I kind of appreciate that, but it's understanding why they do it. So once again, reference we can use, line down to the hands at address, round about kind of here, kind of, you call it loosely speaking, halfway back, when that lead arm is kind of in line with toe line, the club's kind of tracking kind of above the elbow, beneath the shoulder joint, the hands are still on top of their start position.